Hello, everybody. Sam Tom Miller here, and I'm kicking myself because I wanted to get this video out before all the reveals at Comic Con, and I couldn't make that happen. I recorded it 2 days ago, but the recording just didn't work right well, so I'm re-recording this on July 23rd. But you can see here, the last edit I made was July 22nd, so believe me or not, but I made this before the Comic-Con reveals. I just couldn't get it out in time. That's my fault, but like I said, you don't have to believe me, but that's the truth. So, let's talk about the multiverse and how that works in the MCU. So, first we start with a universe. A universe is also called a reality or an Earth, right? Like Earth 616, even though that's not really what the MCU is. That's what characters within the MCU call it. Or a timeline. So all of those things are kind of interchangeable, but we're going to call that a universe. All right. Within a universe, we can have realms. Okay, so Asgard is a realm, Midgard or Earth is a realm. Some realms, like Niflheim, have other realms, like Hell, within them. But realms are just physical places that you can just go to. Now, the 9 realms in Asgardian lore are very far away, which is why they use the Bifrost to help them get there faster. But you could just get in a ship and fly there. There's no special requirement to getting to the different realms. They're just physical locations within a universe. Now compare that to a dimension, and dimensions usually require some other way of getting there, whether that be magic or portals. But we have some dimensions that are pocket dimensions, so they kind of exist in their own space within our universe, like Kunlun, which has a portal that appears in China every 15 years. The Soul World, which you can only access through the Soul Stone. Ta Lo, which has a portal that's guarded by a magical forest in Shang-Chi. And the Noor dimension, which is opened using magic in Ms. Marvel. Now, some dimensions are pocket dimensions. Other dimensions are what are called parallel dimensions, which don't have their own space that they occupy. They just exist everywhere along with the earthly realm or the material plane, the earthly plane. And one of those parallel dimensions is the mirror dimension. We see Doctor Strange and the Ancient One access the mirror dimension. So you don't need a specific location that you have to go to or a specific artifact. You just need the magic to be able to access it. A weirder dimension is the Astral Dimension. And what makes this a little bit more confusing is that there are multiple planes within the Astral Dimension. But the Astral Dimension, your soul can go to and sometimes come back from, but your physical body does not go to. So the Astral Dimension is another parallel dimension that can be accessed anywhere. So the first plane that we know of, the closest one to the material plane, is the astral plane. This is where Doctor Strange and the Ancient One go to in their astral forms. And this is pretty close to the material plane, and that's shown because their actions that they take in the astral plane can have physical effects in the material plane. And your body has to undergo the least amount of change with this first dimension. So it's not dead, and it's not like in a coma or anything. You're just not really conscious. But as we see with Spider-Man, when Doctor Strange pushes Peter Parker's soul out of his body, Spider-Man's body is still able to respond to the spider sense and move around and be active. If we go a little bit further, then we get afterlives like Duat, the afterlife, the Egyptian afterlife that we saw in Moon Knight, and the ancestral plane, which we saw in Black Panther. Now, both of these realms are afterlives where people's physical body can die, and then their soul, their astral body, will continue to live on in the astral dimension. But we also see people that can journey there with their soul and come back to the earthly, the material plane. But their bodies are a little bit more out of commission than with the regular astral plane. So with Moon Knight, he was shot and was in the process of dying before he was allowed to just not do that. And with Black Panther and Eric Killmonger, when they visit the ancestral plane, they have to go through this ceremony and they are buried. So it's a more intense process to get to this further plane where you are further separated from the material plane. And there are some souls that just exist there forever after their physical body has died. To go even further than that, we have Valhalla. And as far as we've seen, no one that's still living has been able to go to Valhalla, and no one that's soul has gone to Valhalla has been able to come back. It doesn't mean that that is impossible. We just haven't seen that happen yet. So I'm putting that in a further plane than the other two. Oh, so that's all stuff that's within the MCU universe, but there are other things that aren't necessarily contained within it, but are connected to it. So we have the Dark Dimension, which again contains multiple dimensions, including the dimension that some people call Hell, which is where the spirit of vengeance, which gives Ghost Rider his power, comes from. And the Dark Dimension collects other dimensions and wants to absorb Earth into its dimension. So that one's a little bit confusing. So now we're getting into multiverse effects. So things like other dimensions. The quantum realm, that's kind of a weird one in terms of the realms, because you can just access it, on Earth using a quantum tunnel or a quantum technology or PIM particles. But the quantum realm is unique among the realms because it can take you to other realms. It can allow you to time travel, which creates alternate timelines, branching timelines, and alternate universes. Other things that can affect the multiverse are dream walking, where you enter the body of someone, a variant of yours, in another universe. And then portals, like we see America Chavez use, can move between universes. But as we saw in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, things like this can cause incursions, which will cause one of the universes, at least one of the universes, to be destroyed. But when we have things like this happening, we get alternate universes, also called an alternate timeline or a branching timeline. So these all come from a similar origin point, but something happens to make it branch off from the timeline. Now, the MCU timeline, the main timeline, is set in a loop which is controlled by Nathaniel Richards. So Nathaniel Richards, he who remains, in the future has seen multiversal war and wants to avoid that. So he has put things in place in order to maintain our timeline, and his only point of contention is that no other Nathaniel Richards is allowed to exist within his collection of timelines. So we've got the main universe, but we also have lots of other alternate branching universes, and some of them are allowed to exist and some of them are not. This is why the TVA tells Loki that when the Avengers time traveled, that was allowed, but when he did it, that was not allowed. All he cares about is whether or not another Nathaniel Richards can exist. So, some of the alternate universes that we've seen the universe where Defender Strange is from. That's where we open in Multiverse of Madness. We've seen the Earth where the Illuminati is from. We've seen the Earth where Sinister Strange is from. That one was affected by an incursion. We've seen the What If universes that all start from a point on the main timeline but then branch off. And we've seen the Savage Land. It's not clear to me if that's its own universe or if that's just a dimension that they were passing through that could be accessed through our universe. Sometimes it's unclear what things are until we learn more about them. But if any of these alternate branches were to cause a bad branch, which is to say a branch that would lead to the existence of another Nathaniel Richards, then the TVA steps in and places either the person causing those issues or the entire universe in the void at the end of time, which is the home of Alioth, which will consume everything there. Alioth guards the Citadel at the end of time, which is the home of He Who Remains, aka Nathaniel Richards, aka the person who is controlling all of this, and all of this is what he refers to as the sacred timeline. A couple other weird things going on before we move on is that we've got other things like the Utopian Parallel. This is where America Chavez is from. Now, that's not within our timeline, but because she has the portal powers, she's able to access our timeline through that. And then we've got things like the gap junction, which exists in the space between universes, but it's said that every universe has their own gap junction, but we've seen at least one of those, but probably two, I would think. But again, it gets very confusing when you get to things between universes. So, excuse me, I got something in my throat. This is where we've been at so far in the MCU, but at the end of Loki, which, by the way, spoilers for everything that's been released up through July 2022, at the end of Loki, He Who Remains was killed, and so now we have Bad Branches allowed to continue, which means we're going to get Kang. And again, I wish I would have gotten this out before the Marvel reveals, because it has now been revealed that the next Avengers movie is going to be titled Avengers Kang Dynasty, I think it was called. So Kang is definitely going to be a major player in Phase 5, which I so wish I would have got this out beforehand, because I totally had that called that he is going to be a big player very, very soon. But moving past that, he's not the biggest player. And there are other beings which I think will come into play after Kang has kind of had his time in the spotlight. So, first of all, we've got Celestials. We've already seen some of these. We've seen Arishem in the Eternals. We've seen the Severed Head of Nowhere in Guardians of the Galaxy. And we've seen Ego. And we've also got what are called cosmic entities. We've seen Eternity in Thor the Dark World. We've seen the Watcher in the What If series. It's confusing to me. I'm not familiar with these from the comics, so it's confusing to me which of these are more powerful than the other, or if they're both kind of on the same level. But both of these groups predate the universe and are at least somewhat responsible for the creation of the universe. The Celestials and the cosmic entities are what put the universe into motion. So Kang is a big deal in the universe and in the multiverse, but he's not a creator of universes. So these guys are on a whole nother level. It just seems that most of them, for the most part, are pretty hands-off. Obviously, we saw Arishem and Ego get involved. We saw Eternity get involved when they got to his altar. But for the most part, it seems like they're more hands-off than someone like Kang, who's going to want to actively try to conquer different universes. But this is what I think is coming down the line. And as far as I've seen, they haven't announced this yet. Galactus is another character that, comics, they change all the time who's more powerful than who. But like the Celestials and the cosmic entities, Galactus predates the universe. And so I think Galactus is going to be another major player, either simultaneously with Kang, or perhaps after Kang, or perhaps in another separate universe that then gets crossed over with the mainline MCU universe. So Kang, we know, is coming. Galactus, I think, is not too far behind. But recently, the multiverse got a lot more complicated, because we got 3 big other universes involved. We got the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man universe. We got the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man universe. We got the Tom Hardy Venom universe, which may or may not contain Venom. All 3 of these are now linked with our multiverse, not with that timeline, right? They didn't branch off from another point backwards in the MCU timeline, but they are now connected to the larger multiverse, right? So this is kind of like a system within a larger system. And we know that the Maguire-verse and the Garfield-verse are now multiverses, because the stories that we saw in those movies is not what we saw play out in Spider-Man No Way Home, with those characters being removed to another universe and gone back. So these are now their own multiverses, which have branching timelines, and those multiverses are now connected to this multiverse. So there are multiverses within multiverses. And this is something that I want to clear up, because I think a lot of people get confused on this. Just because a multiverse can have an infinite number of parallel universes does not mean that every possible universe exists within that multiverse. Right? Which is to say that there are other universes that exist that are not within that multiverse, even if it is an infinite multiverse. I'm going to try to simplify this by talking about numbers, right? Between the numbers 1 and 2, there are an infinite amount of numbers between 1 and 2. And between the numbers 3 and 4, there are an infinite amount of numbers between 3 and 4. But none of the numbers between 3 and 4 also exist between 1 and 2. And nothing that exists between 1 and 2 also exists between 3 and 4. So you can have separate infinite multiverses that do not cross over at all, right? But then, if we connect 3 with 2, right, and 1 is already connected to 2, now we can have this 1 to 2 multiverse and this 3 to 4 multiverse that now has a connection between 2 and 3, and so now we can have these subsets of infinite multiverses that now share a commonality, share a common access point. So we have multiple multiverses existing within a larger multiverse. I'm gesturing with my hands, which you guys can't see, but hopefully you're understanding that, right? So this is a multiverse, and this is a multiverse, and this is a multiverse, and this is at least one universe, but very possibly its own multiverse. But now each of these separate multiverses all exist within a larger scale multiverse, right? But we're not done yet. Let's move on even bigger, because we've got other multiverses and universes that are currently unknown how, if and how they will connect. We've got the X-Men multiverse, right? Now, yes, we got Patrick Stewart as Professor X in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, but it is not the same Professor X. So we do not know yet if the X-Men multiverse films that we've seen are going to be connected to the MCU or not. That is yet to be seen. And this is another thing that I think people are not thinking about correctly. When we talk about bringing the X-Men into the MCU, people seem to think that it's going to be one of two things. Either number one, they cross over and they bring the old stuff that we've already seen to what we have now, and then just continue on from there, right? So all the X-Men movies, they are now canon in the MCU multiverse, and we keep going with characters from there. Or option number two, people seem to think that they're going to totally start from scratch. Mutants are now a thing in the MCU, and they're brand new, and they don't have any of the history that is commonly associated with mutants. That's not how it has to be, right? We can bring in mutants, get them to cross over with our characters, and then do basically prequel movies of the stories from that multiverse before it crossed over with the MCU multiverse. So we can have Wolverine or Professor X or, Shadowcat or whoever show up in the MCU as a new actor playing that character that we haven't seen before, and then still get a standalone X-Men movie exploring their origins in a universe outside of the MCU that will eventually tie into the MCU. Right? So we can still get a standalone X-Men movie or trilogy even after they've crossed over, because I don't think they're going to wait to set all of that up before they cross over. But we can have these things separate when it works for the storytelling, and then combine them when we want to use those opportunities. Same thing could be said for Deadpool. Same thing could be said for the Fantastic Four. And this is where I think they can spend a lot of time in Fantastic Four movies building up Galactus, separate from when we see Galactus start to take a role in the MCU multiverse. We've got similar situations going on with the Netflix series, with the Hulu series, and with the ABC shows, right? They can kind of keep what they want and get rid of the rest, because they can just say that what we've seen was a multiverse, a different universe, but very similar to what's going on now, right? But we can still acknowledge some of the events in these as canon without taking everything as canon. Multiverses are very convenient for storytelling, because you can just keep what you like and get rid of the rest by saying that, oh no, well that was in another universe, but it happened pretty similarly in this one. Just that really stupid thing that you didn't like, that didn't happen. So now, Again, really wish I would have gotten this out before Comic-Con launched. But what we can do when we've got the MCU Multiverse, Spider-Man separate multiverses, the Venomverse, the X-Men verse, the Fantastic Four verse, what we can do is we can bring in somebody like the Beyonder, who can take characters from separate multiverses and smush them together. And again, it was just announced that one of the upcoming Avengers films is going to be called Secret Wars. I believe that's what it was, right? Secret Wars, there's multiple storylines called Secret Wars in the comics. It's very confusing. Comics are very confusing. The original Secret Wars is one of my favorite comic storylines of all time. And I know that other people that I respect their opinion don't like it, and I haven't read it since I was a kid, so I need to reread it. So maybe it's not as good as I remember it being. But basically, there's this very powerful being called the Beyonder. Like these other guys, he is extremely, extremely powerful, and he just creates a planet out of chunks of other planets, brings these heroes from Earth, transports them to this new planet called Battleworld, and basically says, hey, you, fight, and whoever wins, you can have what you want. Now, in the original storyline that I'm familiar with, that was all contained within one universe, but I see no reason that in the MCU, he can't be a multiversal figure and take the Avengers from our world and some Spider-Man characters from other worlds and the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, even if they haven't crossed over yet, and that can be the big crossover, is the Secret Wars, right? And then the multiverse can kind of be shattered and we can send people where we want to send them after that point. Now, I haven't read the sequels to the original Secret Wars storyline, and I haven't read the newer Secret Wars storyline from the last decade or so, so I don't know which versions they're going to be taking stuff from, but I'm very excited because, you know, part of why I love the comic so much is that it's just taking your action figures and smashing them together, and you know, sometimes that's just really cool to do. So, again, wish I was ahead of the Comic-Con. I'm going to try to stop saying that because I just sound whiny. And it's my own fault for not getting it out early. But Kang is going to be a big player. I expect Galactus is going to be a big player. And I expect the Beyonder is going to be a big player moving into phase 5 and 6 and beyond. And, you know, my first draft of this, my previous recording, I was talking about how people say that phase 4 has no focus and no direction. But it's very clearly leading toward the multiverse. And I even said, of course, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said something along the lines of, if phase 1, 2, and 3 was the Infinity War saga, phase 4, 5, and 6 is the Multiverse Saga. And I think they officially said that's what it is. I had it somewhere and I just didn't get it. Anyway, let's move on. Because we're still not done yet. Okay, so all of this stuff, these multiverses within multiverses, these extremely powerful characters, that's not even the most powerful, because then you got this dude called the One Above All. And look, I don't know much about this guy, but my understanding is that this is the most powerful being in any Marvel anything. He kind of basically represents the creative team behind Marvel. So again, you can have him reset anything you want to reset, separate anything you want to be set. You know, you've got things in play that can do the things you want to do and then separate out after that. But if we get huge things going in the X-Men, huge villains, you know, I don't know if they're going to do Magneto again. Maybe something with Mr. Sinister. Get some huge villains in there. We get Doctor Doom and Galactus and Silver Surfer going in Fantastic Four. And then we get Kang going in our mainline MCU universe. There's a whole bunch of really cool stuff they can do with transfers of power, and you know, because Doctor Doom took over the Beyonder's power in the Secret Wars, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited. So this is the end of kind of the main chunk of this movie, of this video. I wanted to explain the differences between realms and dimensions and universes and timelines, and how the MCU multiverse has worked, and how it connects with other multiverses, and how an infinite multiverse doesn't mean that every possible multiverse or every possible universe. That was the main point of this video. So if you want to check out now, I totally get it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. Sorry, that's my phone talking. But now I want to get into the crazy stuff. This I would call all of this predictions and expectations. This next part I'm going to call rampant what ifism. Right? Because if you take the multiverse to the extreme, it can go so far beyond just Marvel, right? So we've got all these Marvel characters, all these storylines. What if we cross that over with Star Wars, right? We can take the characters. It doesn't have to fit into the original timeline, right? So many people complained about Obi-Wan Kenobi with that. They had to like railroad the story so much so that they didn't conflict with the original timeline. It doesn't have to be part of the original timeline. It can be a separate timeline, and we can cross over Star Wars characters with Marvel characters. How about Pixar characters? How about a live-action Incredibles taking on villains with the Avengers? Right? Pixar is its own huge universe. We can cross that over. How about some of the Disney live-action remakes? You know who the most recent character to appear in the MCU is, as of this recording? Hercules. You know what the most recent live-action Disney remake that's been announced is? Hercules. You know who's working on the Hercules live-action remake? The Russo brothers, the directors of the Avengers. I saw this theory on Film Theory, and it sounds crazy, but like it could happen. They could tie in the Disney live-action remakes with characters from the MCU. And it doesn't have to stay that way, because you can just reset the multiverse later with characters like the Beyonder and the One Above All. But like, do I want that to happen? Not necessarily, but is that a really cool idea to think of? Yeah. Yeah, it is. But now we're going to move past Disney, right? This is all pretty easy because Disney owns all of these. But if you really wanted to stretch it, we could get Marvel crossing over with DC. In the comics, not only have Marvel and DC characters met in comics, and you've got characters like Hawkeye who have joined the Justice League, but there was a line of comics called Amalgam Comics where they combined characters from the two to make new characters. The most famous of which, in my opinion, the one I've always hear the most about, is Darkclaw, which is Wolverine crossed with Batman, right? Now you may be thinking, there's no way these competitors are going to work together, right? But look at Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, right? That's a movie that had characters and involvement and approval from multiple studios, and not even for a storytelling reason, just kind of for a fun, hey, look, it's those people reason. If you wanted to actually get together and make huge movies larger than anything Marvel or DC could do on their own, they could get together. You could include Dark Horse characters in there. Get Hellboy in the mix, right? You could get Spawn and other independent characters from Image Comics in there. You could do some really huge scale things. And then again, when you're done, you can just reset it all. So you don't have to explain why Superman isn't helping Spider-Man pay his rent or whatever, right? Again, these are not things that I expect to happen anytime soon, but it's the kind of thing that I can't help but think about. And think about how cool it could be. And now we're going to really cross over. We're going to move outside the realm of comics, right? Because what if you put a character like the Black Knight, who has existed in multiple iterations over multiple time periods, put a character like the Black Knight in the Lord of the Rings world. Put him in Middle Earth, right? Have him cross over with those characters. Take characters like Doctor Strange, mix them in with wizards from Harry Potter, right? All of these studios have huge, huge franchises. Team up S.H.I.E.L.D. with the people from Mission Impossible or from James Bond to do an epic crossover spy storyline. Have characters fight Decepticons, teaming up with the Transformers to fight Decepticons. You can have Transformers transform into superhero-themed robots. That'd be awesome. Get some Savage Land crossing over with Jurassic Park with all the dinosaurs, right? Or have characters like Ghost Rider show up in a Fast and Furious movie. How cool would that be? right? Then you got things like Hunger Games. That's basically Secret Wars, right? So have a Secret Wars, a multiversal Hunger Games. Pit these guys against each other. Marvel versus DC versus Transformers versus the Lord of the Rings characters in a Hunger Games thing. Team up the Punisher with John Wick. Put whatever the heck Daniel Craig's character's name in Knives Out. Put him in a detective story solving a superhero mystery, right? Again, am I expecting these things to happen? No. But is it absolutely possible that they could? It is. If these guys just chose to work together to make boatloads of money. So that's the end of the crazy part of this video. Hopefully I didn't lose you too much, because the main point of this was all this multiverse stuff. So let's go back there to close it out. But let me know what you guys think about all this. Would it be a good idea? Would it be horrible? Would you be able to, care about things that might just be reset at the end? For me, I'm like, as long as the story's good, I think it's worth it to try to tell it. But maybe that's just me. So those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on the multiverse. Who do you think's coming after Kang? Do you think Galactus and the Beyonder are going to be a part of this or not? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.